Welcome to the podcast series showcasing the winners of the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Awards. We established this award to honor the outstanding contributions of individuals nationwide who work tirelessly to advance core pillars of Dyslexia Canada's mission, ensuring that all Canadian children have access to universal early screening and evidence-based, systematic, explicit foundational reading instruction. Right now, just over half of Canadian children are living in provinces committed to implementing that. Recently, the government of BC announced that it will be implementing universal screening. That's a step forward, but the curriculum is still based on a balanced literacy approach, and that doesn't work well for students with dyslexia and many other children. You can see this in BC's literacy scores. They show that more than 34% of young adults in BC finish high school with low literacy skills. There has been significant progress and movement among BC educators driving change, and our guest for this episode is one of them. Melanie Baerg is a full-time faculty member in the School of Education at the University of Northern BC and a sessional instructor in the School of Education at Vancouver Island University. She's also a licensed school psychologist in BC, and since 2012, Melanie has worked as a school psychologist in many rural and northern BC communities and on several traditional First Nations territories. She's also a recipient of the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Awards. Congratulations, Melanie.
So I'm very happy to be joining you today from the traditional and unceded and ancestral territory of the Secwepemc peoples here in Williams Lake, British Columbia. This is the home of Phyllis Webstad, and you may not know the name, but I'm sure everybody knows about Orange Shirt Day. This is an amazing place to live, and if you're ever in British Columbia, Williams Lake tends to be a place that people kind of just skirt through. But if you can spend some time here, it's a phenomenal place to live, and I feel extremely privileged to live here and honored to be here on these lands.
You've dedicated a considerable part of your career to studying and educating other people about dyslexia and other reading challenges, and I wonder if you have any personal connection or motivating factor that got you involved in this work.
I took what I call a scenic route into this field. It wasn't what I originally started out to do in terms of my training and my work and experience and things like that, but I had some really formative experiences in my early school years. I was actually still a student. I was a peer tutor for a period of time during my junior high school years, and that was the first time that I really got exposure to the fact that people could struggle with the printed word. And I wasn't aware of what it was. I didn't know the word for it, but my job was to read and to scribe for students who really struggled with the printed word, and I was really struck by two students that I worked with who were twins, and they had the same difficulty. So it planted a seed in me in that understanding that there's something biological, something hereditary going on, because they had the exact same difficulty. They could understand everything that was read to them, and they could articulate their thoughts, and they understood the content, but they couldn't lift the words off the page. And so that just stuck with me. And I do have some family members that also had similar struggles, but it just wasn't something that was really talked about or diagnosed or, thought about in any way that was discussed in my world. And so when I left high school, I thought that I wanted to go into journalism. I did a media and communication studies degree, a Bachelor of Arts, and I also did a minor in psychology. And it was the minor in psychology that actually ended up guiding me more down this path. I figured out fairly quickly that I really wanted to work directly with people in a different type of role than what journalism or public relations would allow. So I was working in a community program in the community of Surrey in British Columbia, and that program allowed me to work with individuals, youth ages 15 to 25, who are experiencing multiple barriers to employment, food security, housing, all kinds of challenges in their lives. And this program was designed to help them get ready for employment, help them to develop skills around, looking after themselves and having healthy lives and these types of things. So through that, I recognized this pattern again. There was an incredible amount of these young people that were very bright, but had a lot of difficulty in school. A lot of them had left school, dropped out of school, and they struggled with the printed word. They struggled to fill out applications, to write resumes, to navigate a recipe, and this is the days before the internet and, having voice to text technology and all of these things. So again, I saw this pattern, and that led me to working in a high school as a career advisor. And I saw the same patterns with the high school students that I was working with. And a lot of them wanted to go on to trades training or post-secondary programs that they couldn't access because they didn't have the literacy requirement. They didn't have the English requirement that they needed because they struggled to read and to write at the proficiency that they needed to. So again, I just saw, people that seemed to be able to function in so many aspects and shine and really thrive in other aspects of their lives, but they were so limited and so impacted socially and emotionally and economically by this struggle with literacy. And so that's what led me, had the light bulb moment that, teaching. And it was the principal of the school at the time actually tapped me and said, "What are you doing? You should be a teacher. You're great with kids." So and the rest is history. I went into teaching with this intention from the very beginning of my career of trying to understand what is going on when kids struggle with reading, with the printed word, or with understanding what they read.
From there, you went on to work with a lot of different school districts across BC. What have you observed along the way as far as how reading is taught in public schools?
I've worked in public schools both as a teacher for about 13 years, so about half of my career at this point. And then the other part of the time I worked as a school psychologist. So I've always worked very closely with teachers and with schools and with students in schools. And I've worked in a number of places from the Lower Mainland all the way up to remote areas. I lived on Haida Gwaii, which is a group of islands off the coast, northwest coast of British Columbia. And a lot of the communities I've lived in the northern and rural areas have the same types of issues when it comes to teaching reading and assessing for reading challenges and or not even just reading challenges, but just assessing to see where kids are at. I noticed a pattern. I noticed the same things. And it wasn't until I stepped out of regular education and into school psychology that I started to get some of the answers that I was seeking. All of my training and the things that I had done, I did a special education graduate diploma. I focused on learning disabilities in my teacher education program, but none of that gave me personally the foundation that I needed to really understand what was going on when kids couldn't connect letters and sounds. So the words, the printed word that they're seeing with the sounds that they're making. I wasn't provided with that information. It wasn't part of any of my training. And in fact, I was often told quite the opposite, that we didn't need to worry about teaching that. It was about making sure kids had really good, rich experiences with literature and that they were provided with a lot of choice in what they read. And it was about finding the good fit book. I was working with kids that really struggled with reading, and I could see that it wasn't enough for them. And I had little glimpses along the way from different instructors and different courses that I took, professional development, that gave me a little bit more insight. So, I would try some things, but none of it was consistent enough, and we didn't have the systems in place to support those kids, especially the kids that didn't get it in the early years. If they were still struggling in their later years, the systems just weren't there. And so that is what I've noticed across the board, is that teachers go into teaching because they want to impact kids positively. I haven't met a teacher that has gone into teaching because they don't want their children or their students to succeed. It's quite the opposite. And it's heartbreaking as a teacher to see students struggle. But the mentality has been, if the students are struggling, it must be something wrong with the student. And often there is a neurological, like dyslexia or something else going on that is causing the child to have more difficulty. But the deficit model, thinking that if you have a difficulty, it means you're always going to have difficulty. That's what's been the pattern. And we really have to get away from that, because what we can do, what we can control in our teaching, and if we shift some things in our practice, it can actually move almost all students forward in their reading. It's a very small population of the student population, of the general population, that are unable to move forward. Very, very small. So yeah, so that's what I've noticed across the province, and that's what spurred me to go into post-secondary education.
You've chosen to dedicate this chapter of your career to making systemic changes to the way that teachers are trained so fewer teachers are left unprepared to teach students with reading difficulties. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like my training is from the southern school districts. I don't think there are a whole lot of teacher education programs that vary from the type of training that I received. Certainly my experience in talking with teachers, and when I talk to them about models of understanding reading and literacy and language development that are more rooted in scientific understandings than what I was taught, it's the first time that they've heard it. And there's very mixed feelings around that. Some people are upset about what they've heard. They're upset that they didn't know this the whole time, and the differences that they could have been making. Some don't want to believe it. It's really hard to accept that maybe what you've been doing and how you've thought about reading isn't actually accurate. That's really hard for teachers to hear. But I really did feel, as I was doing, I would say the vast majority, probably 95% of the students that are referred to me for school psychology assessments, they're referred because they struggle with reading. That is the number one reason why kids are referred for assessments, and that certainly has been the case for me. And so when I do these assessments and I report out to teachers and I'm talking about evidence-based practices and what this individual child needs, I'm saying the same. It was basically doing teacher education, one psychoeducational assessment at a time, but it's not very effective to do it that way. So it was kind of an epiphany moment when I realized, this really is something that I needed this information before I started teaching. And it looks like a lot of teachers are not getting it. And maybe that's where I need to focus my energy. And that's really what made me shift into teacher education.
You have been advocating for systemic changes in how reading is taught and pushing for revisions to the BC literacy curriculum. Can you provide an example of what systemic change would entail?
Yeah, it sounds so overwhelming, doesn't it? Systemic change, like it is huge, but the only way to really tackle this is to look at it as systems. We have a tendency to operate in silos in education. There's been some efforts to kind of move away from that, but typically we've had special education or inclusive education, and then we have the curriculum department, and then we have, we may have like different pockets of things but people aren't really talking to each other. So when I'm talking about systemic change, it's really about looking at the whole system at the provincial level, the district level, the school level, and the classroom level, and making sure that what we're doing to move students forward in literacy is actually aligned all the way along. So that means that our curriculum needs to reflect what the evidence about how reading develops is actually reflected in our curriculum. Teachers really need a scope and sequence around how literacy develops, what kinds of things we should be looking for, and how do we screen to see who's actually struggling with these things. This is one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, about what people in this area are advocating for, is that it's kind of a scripted program and it's one size fits all and every kid gets it no matter what. And nothing could be further from the truth. It is extremely differentiated if it's done well. And when we are talking about systemic change, we are really needing that to be data driven. And so having really good, high quality assessments, we have assessments in British Columbia, but they aren't necessarily assessing the things that are going to tell us how to direct what to do with our instruction for that individual or as a school or a class. It gets really almost like a temperature check for how we're doing to be able to look at our own practices and what we might need to shift.
Well, you've even started a petition, right?
I was involved in starting a petition. I've definitely been one of the key drivers of that. And so when we talk about systemic change, if anybody's wondering, well, what are we actually advocating for? That petition sums it all up. It lists what the issues are, what the challenges are. And it's available on change.org if people just search for, I think it's under Language Arts Review for BC.
In your opinion, what would be a solid initial step towards transitioning the province of BC away from its balanced literacy approach and towards implementing evidence-based methods for reading?
Our current Ministry of Education and Childcare, the current situation right now, they actually just made an announcement at the last budget that they're dedicating $30 million over the next 3 years towards supporting students who have dyslexia and other related learning disorders that are related to literacy. And a part of that is looking at screening. It's looking at, okay, how do we provide interventions that are more effective, and not just at the early grades, but K to 12. So the early screening is really important. If we have the data there, then we know what the problem is. Like we know there's an issue, we know there's a problem, but we don't know how significant it is and where the breakdown is actually happening for a lot of kids. So having good screening tools and having that consistent across the province is absolutely critical. So I think we have taken an important big step there. But data is only useful if you do something with it, right? It's great to have data, but if you're not actually, what is the point if you're not going to act on it and do something different? So we have to create some type of a committee or something to look at our language arts curriculum and really get strategic about how we can align that with what the evidence is telling us about how reading and writing develop in children and oral language, and also what we need to take out of our curriculum that maybe isn't actually helping a lot of students. So references to 3Qing and things like that, leveled readers, resources that we promote in the province and in our districts and in our schools aren't always actually moving students forward who need help the most. So I think we are taking steps, and it's really positive and exciting, but we have to have people around the table who have different types of knowledge. We need classroom teachers, obviously. And then we also need people like speech and language pathologists and school psychologists, because school psychologists and speech and language pathologists are the people that when schools are stuck, when teachers are stuck and they don't know what to do and the student's not moving forward, we're who you call on. So I think our lens and looking at what is going on, and school psychologists, a lot of school psychologists are teachers as well. I'm not an anomaly there. And so often we do have a really good, we're in a good position to bridge research to practice and help teachers to understand some of the things that they haven't had access to, and quite frankly, don't have a lot of time to do. I think it's a real disservice to teachers to expect them to weed through all of this information. I was able to step out of the classroom, focus on school psychology, and be able to access it. But I'm very aware that teachers have like negative time. They don't have time to recreate everything and invent things from scratch. So having really good curriculum and having teachers' voice around the table when we're thinking about these things and looking at revisions is really, really important. So I really hope to see our Ministry of Education create a committee like that where there's multiple voices at the table that need to be included here.
It sounds like you're saying the answers are there. You really just have to educate the educators now. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Is there anything that you would recommend to teachers in other provinces that have decided to take on this challenge?
Well, I think it's that combination of grassroots, right, as well as systemic change from organizations. So one of the things that I did as in my advocacy was write a position paper on behalf of the BC Association of School Psychologists. I've been an executive member. I'm just phasing out of that role now to make more time for teaching and my doctoral work and all of that's going on. But writing that position paper, I think, is really helpful because it shows that it's not just, one person's voice, one person's opinion. There's decades of research behind this, and having organizations like pediatricians in Ontario coming forward. The number of referrals that I've received as a school psychologist from pediatricians who are concerned about kids' mental health, right? Their mental health and their physical health is suffering because they struggle in school, and what they struggle with in school is reading. So having, pediatricians, asking pediatricians to come in and speech and language pathologists to really show everyone that this isn't just somebody's opinion. It's not about someone's politics or their ideology. This is really a human rights issue, and I think that's a lens that we don't look at this issue enough. And I think it affects a vast amount more students than we realize. Our data in British Columbia, for better or worse, it is what it is. It is what we have, and it's telling us consistently about 25% students, non-Indigenous students, are struggling with reading and writing, and at least 40% of our First Nations and Indigenous students are struggling. And that's probably an underestimate, because we have a number of students who don't write those tests. And what are they actually assessing? And, there's all these questions and things around it, but that is the data we have. And I'm just not okay with that when we know that 97% of students can learn to read to proficiency. We really should be looking at this as a human rights issue, because it is such a barrier for students to be able to have positive outcomes in so many aspects of their lives.
So not just education as far as reading goes, but ultimately a holistic approach to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the grassroots, I went on a bit of a tangent there, getting back to the grassroots, like teachers who have made these changes in spite of not having the systems in place. If you're a teacher and you have changed your practice and you are seeing positive results in your students, and you're seeing students move forward in their reading and getting this great progress, and you can find a way to showcase that, whether it's a Facebook page. We've got the Science of Reading, or British Columbia Science of Reading page, and here in BC, if you can showcase what you're doing in your classroom, what it looks like, I think that's really helpful for other teachers who are so new to this. There's a perception, I think, that this is all, kids sitting in rows and they're just doing worksheets and teachers are barking at them all day, and it's not interactive and they're just receptacles. And that's so far from the truth. When this type of literacy instruction is happening, students are engaged, they're on task, they're excited about their learning, it's differentiated, they're working in whole group, in small group, in individual. It's very dynamic and very interactive and very inspiring. It is also something that can and should be very culturally responsive. That's the other concern that I hear raised, is that what we're advocating for isn't culturally responsive. But honestly, if you're trying to learn any language, you have to learn the code in that language if you want to read in it. And so the English code, if we want all students to be proficient in English or French or whatever the languages that they're being taught, that's the system that we're in. And that's not to say that there isn't a place for language revitalization and for Indigenous languages and other languages to be explicitly taught as well. It's not an instead of, it's an addition to, and it's just a change. We're already teaching students to read and write in English. What we're asking is just for a tweak in how we do that, and then we can bring in more opportunities to make sure that it is done in relevant ways and in ways that allow us to connect with our students and who they are, the students in front of us. And that's always going to vary. Adding more science into, or science-informed practices and resources into what we do as teachers doesn't take away from the art of teaching. That will never go away. Relationships are the foundation of all of this. And when I talk about this topic, I refer to it as science and trauma-informed literacy instruction. You can't have one without the other. That relationships are absolutely the foundation. You have to know your students. And then if teachers are also provided with the knowledge base that they need around how we actually learn to read, and what are those tools and practices that we can do to most effectively and efficiently move our students forward, that's the sweet spot. That's what we're after. So yeah, we're sitting in rows and being really clinical about things. Yes, I'm a school psychologist, but at the heart of school psychology is about holistic human development, and that's what this is all about.
You can tell by the way that you speak about this subject, Melanie, that you have a lot of passion for the work that you do and the children and families that you're trying to help overcome these barriers. And I'm sure that played a big part in you getting this award. So congratulations again, Melanie, and thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really, truly am honored to have this award, but it's not about the spotlight on me. I want the spotlight on the issue. That really is the most critical thing for me.
If you're in British Columbia, stay tuned for Dyslexia Canada's upcoming series of workshops for BC educators focusing on the science of reading. For more information, visit the Dyslexia Canada website and social media channels. Thanks for listening to this episode of the series showcasing the winners of the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Awards. To learn more about this year's winners, visit dyslexiacanada.org, where you can read a blog about each of them. Stay tuned for our next episode.